Well, it's April already. Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we're going to discuss a few chores to get done in the garden to improve your summer harvest. Let's get going. April is one of the busiest times of years in the garden here at the Garden Hutch. Before we got started on the chores and things, one thing I did want to discuss with everyone is the timing of when you put your plants in the ground. You know, by April, we should already have our lettuces and our peas, all of the sort of cool weather hardy crops. Those should already be in and well along their way, like our cabbages and such. Things like our warm weather vegetables, though, April is a very, very deceptive month. I can't tell you how many times here on the homestead that I've put in tomatoes and squash and that sort of stuff because it was the 1st of April. It felt good. The 10-day forecast had no chance of freeze or frost. Got everything in the ground, put in all of the effort, and then, you know, towards the end of April, we get a freeze that comes in and sort of either A, sends you scrambling to try to, you know, cover everything, hope that you have everything covered well enough that the temperature doesn't drop down too far, or you just have to start all over if everything does get frozen. So this is a time of year for patience. And one of the easiest ways I've found to make sure that I'm patient as a gardener is to keep myself busy in the garden. If I feel like I'm doing things that are working towards that summer harvest, even if it's not, you know, necessarily putting in that squash or tomato plant, if I feel like I'm doing something constructive that's going to pay off in the summertime, it's easier for me to leave those plants in the greenhouse for now. One of the most important things to consider when April hits is to make sure that you have your garden plan ready. So just know in the back of your mind the areas that need to be prepped. Make sure you know which vegetables are going in which beds and in which area. And, you know, even if you need to, even in specific rows if you're doing multi-cropping. And the reason that's important for us here is because you want to make sure if you need any micronutrients or any of those things specific, again, I always go back to our tomato plants, but it can be same thing for peppers or eggplants. You can go ahead and add those organic ingredients now because, as I keep saying, those things take a few weeks for the microbes in your soil to break down the organic fertilizers for use. So if you can get them in now, then it'll give it 3 or 4 weeks for that nitrogen or phosphorus or trace minerals to get broken down by the actual microbes in the soil. And what that's going to do is going to allow your microbes to multiply, which is going to give you a faster delivery system for your organic compounds in the future. So prepping your beds in April is very important for the success of your summer garden. Depending on how you grow your vegetables, it's going to depend on how much work, how much time that you need to dedicate to getting these beds ready. So here on the homestead, we utilize 3 different kinds of garden beds. We have raised beds, we have in-ground beds, and we also do container gardening. So we'll review what it takes in April to prepare these for our summer gardens. For our raised beds here at the Garden Hutch, we like to have ours prepared at the end of the season before. So the beds behind me, we grew a lot of fall vegetables. We grew beets and carrots and that sort of thing. So when we pulled them all, they were all pulled and ready to go at the end of December. What we did was we added the amendments. We already had our garden plan, so we added the appropriate amendments, and then we covered them with leaves that fell from our oak trees. We left them in there all winter long. And the way that we prep our raised beds is all we have to do is we remove the leaf litter that protected it through the wintertime, take just a hand tool and go through and rake the top. You don't want to turn it over because you don't want to disturb the microbes any more than you absolutely have to, but you do sort of want to take a rake and sort of breaking the top up, and that just increases the chances of absorption, so that when you put on your thin layer of compost in the early spring, right before you plant, we put on a real thin layer of compost, and then we may, depending on what we're growing, we may add something like bone meal for our carrots or onions or something like that. For us, the most challenging option for gardening are the in-ground beds, and that's only because it's a bit more labor intensive. So what we're looking at here, this is where we grow our potatoes, and on the other side of the fence is where Leslie grows her pollinators for this specific garden. What we've done is, again, we do like to be proactive, and I know we say that a lot here at the Garden Hutch, but it is better to be proactive than reactive. So what we've done is we turned the dirt over whenever we took out the potatoes last year. We went through and we planted beans to add some nitrogen back, because potatoes are heavy feeders. At the end of the year, once the beans were done, we clipped the plants, leaving the roots in the ground. And then as soon as the dirt was thawed and it was able to work, I went through and I turned it once more. And before I did that, I just added about a ½ inch of compost. And the reason I do that is, again, because the potatoes, they'll go here again this year. We'll cover the potatoes with straw, so that'll add some organic matter. But you do want to increase the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So you want all three for potatoes. And again, that's basically because they're heavy feeders. If you are doing in-ground beds and you're growing something like purple hulls, which we do in our bigger garden, you don't really have to add any amendments to that. But if you're doing something like corn, you're going to have to add more. So on in-ground beds, it's a little more difficult to control the soil type, and you do have to add a few more different types of fertilizer to it to ensure that the ground will give you the type of garden that you're looking for. The final type of garden that we do here at the Garden Hutch are these container gardens. As you can see in here, we've just drilled holes in this cast iron pot and we've put in strawberries. And these strawberries will be for our chickens whenever they flower. They don't mind the plants. The plants will grow there. They'll ignore them. Once the delicious red strawberries start coming up, our chickens will come over and devour them. We only did this because the company we order our strawberry plants, they included a few extra whenever they sent them. So we decided, as opposed to being stingy and keeping them for ourselves, we would let our chickens have them. We also grow, you can see down there on the corner, we have little buckets. We've shown this before as well, that we grow our peas in. We also throw the extra onion bulbs and things that didn't fit in our growing space in the containers. Container gardening is very simple. It's also a great way if you have limited space. If you live in an apartment or a condo or something, you can do this on the sunny side of your condo or apartment. Well, all you have to do is make sure that there's plenty of drainage on the bottom, get the correct drill bit, put a few holes in. We like to put a few rocks on the bottom of ours to help with drainage. And then what we do is we take a little bit of cocoa coir. You can use peat moss if you'd prefer. And we mix that with our compost and a little bit of perlite just to hold on to some of the water that goes through it. And that's really all there is to it. So by and large, I find container gardening to be the easiest to prep of the three options. So once you've had the opportunity to prep your growing spaces for your garden, the next thing we like to do is go ahead and put up any of our trellises, stakes, or tomato pepper cages. The reason for this is it gives your structures a time to settle before you go ahead and introduce the plants themselves. Also things like stakes, and I've made this mistake in the past whenever I didn't plan correctly, but if you have your tomatoes or your peppers, your eggplants, even your beans, if they're the trellising type of bean, once they've started growing, if you try to go in and retroactively add the structures, there is a good chance you're going to disturb their root system that is just starting to establish. And while that may not be catastrophic, any gardener knows that if you disturb the root system at a bad time of your plants, it is going to decrease your overall harvest for the summer. So if we just take the time, we've already planned the garden, we've already prepped the garden growing area, so it's a great time before putting your plants in to go ahead, purchase all of your trellises, tomato cages, stakes, that sort of thing, and get them in the spot. Not only that, but it also gives you something to do and something to look at while you're, being patient and waiting for the end of April so you don't plant too early and regret it. Another thing that we have on our April list every year is to combat fire ants. Now, and for us here, Arkansas Zone 7B, fire ants are an invasive species. And what that means are the animals and plant life and the other insects around the area, they are not adapted to dealing with fire ants. So fire ants will come in, and a lot of times there's nothing to prevent them from just spreading everywhere. And simply on our 2 acres, sometimes we'll have 5, 6 large fire mount mounds. They're terrible for the chickens. They get in our animals. Both of our dogs or cats will get them. They'll bite them up pretty good. Also, I like to wear flip-flops to the yard in the summertime, and I'm not sure if you've ever stepped in a fire ant mound in flip-flops, but it is a bad day. So what we like to do is we'll take about a week and a half period where we know that we're going to have rain on the back end of it, and we'll get this stuff, I believe it's called Amdro. And while we try to keep all chemicals out when it comes to growing because of our chickens and when it comes to our vegetables, when it comes to fire ants, I don't pull punches. So, you know, I'm sure there are organic means to get rid of them. I've tried several of them and they were not effective for us. They may be for you. I did get this Amdro. All you do, you take it, you sprinkle it around the mounds when they start getting really active, give it about 3-4 days. And it really worked last year. We got rid of several mounds last year that were just in a terrible spot, especially for gardening. You had to pass them several times throughout the day. Anyway, I highly recommend keeping an eye on your yard. If you see the fire ant mounds, now make sure they're fire ants. You don't want to kill the native ants. Those are really good for your gardens, actually. The fire ants are terrible, though. I recommend just keeping your chickens up, you know, keeping your animals away from them. Put the Amdro out. The key for us anyway was making sure that they had a 2 or 3 day period where the fire ants could eat the Amdro before the rain hit, right? So once the rain hit, the Amdro is designed where it'll melt away so that you don't have to worry about your flock or your animals once that rain hits. So just make sure that you prepare for that. We just keep the chickens up and they do eat more, but in the end, you know, whenever you consider, you know, a few days extra chicken food or getting eaten all year by fire ants, for us, the pendulum swings for, you know, killing the dadgum fire ants. So I'll put these next 2 topics kind of together. They're not really related, but I talk about them so often on the channel. I just want to hit them real fast one more time. The first being pollinator plants. Make sure whenever you're planting your garden, don't forget your pollinator plants. It's really difficult to get a large number of cucumbers or squash, things that you're going to want, you know, to pickle for later or put in your freezer. You're going to want to have those beneficial insects around. So plan now so that you will be successful in the future when it comes to your pollinators. And the second thing I'll touch on real quick are baby chickens. If you are wanting to start a flock, April is a perfect time to do so. It's starting to get warmer. Also, if you do it in April, then usually in August, around mid to end of August, you'll start getting eggs. So well before you go back into, you know, when the kids go back to school, that type of thing, you'll start getting eggs. And let's be honest, baby chickens are fun. It's something the whole family can kind of interact with and have a good time. So those are 2 more real quick things: pollinators, baby chicks. Think about your pollinators. If you'd like, get your baby chicks. We enjoy having the chickens. Well, we saved the best part for last, and well, that's because it comes at last. The last thing that we do in April, specifically the last weekend in April here on the homestead, is plant our warm weather vegetables. It's probably my favorite time of year because I'm sure you all know who watch this channel regularly, and those who don't, hopefully you start watching, you'll know I love tomatoes. Tomatoes are what got me into gardening. It's what makes me look forward to gardening every year. And when I get to put those in, it starts to feel like the gardening year is in full swing when that happens. Again, we don't plant until the last weekend of April every year. This week it'll be on Saturday, April 30th. So we'll try to record a bunch of that and show it to you. If you folks are more adventurous than us, or you know, if you have a better system to cover things, you can plant earlier if you want. We don't recommend it. We just like to be sure. We still get tomatoes around the same time as everybody else. It doesn't feel like it puts us behind, but it does put us far ahead of people who put their stuff out early and it gets hit with a frost or a freeze. So in our mind, it's better just to wait and be patient. That's why we try to keep as busy as we can during the early and middle parts of the month, to kind of, you know, satisfy that itch, if you will, for gardening. But then when the time comes, it is well worth it and it'll pay off in the end. Well, as always, I would like to say thank you to all of you who have made it to the end of the video. If you have not, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help us out a lot. You can hit the little bell icon and YouTube will let you know when we upload new content. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like. Until next time, I hope you folks take care of yourselves. Peace.